Fantastic. Okay, so tonight, as Kevin mentioned, I'll be speaking about my ongoing PhD, which is Coinage, Landscape and Society in the Anglo-Scottish Borders, from 1136 to 1603. So the outline of tonight's lecture will be first an introduction to the project, my thesis. So tonight's talk will actually be focused on the 12th century, which is the bulk of the stuff that I've actually managed so far to actually get analysed and some of the theory applied to it. I'll explain also briefly about the nature of the 12th century border and the idea of what this border actually is, followed by a brief note on the methodologies that I am using. And then I will show you some distribution maps of the 12th century coinage in the Anglo-Scottish borders, and then finally followed by the application of some of these theories that I will talk about to the numismatic data. So I've got for this PhD, I've got three main research questions. The first research question is the influence of monetary policies and national politics on coin use and loss in the Anglo-Scottish borders. So that's everything from national warfare to periods of peace, and to national changes in the currencies, such as weight reductions in the Scottish coinage from 1367. And my second research question is, what significance did the changing nature of the Anglo-Scottish border influence coin use and how it's lost? And by that I mean is the changing nature of border societies, through periods of peace and through periods of war. Because there's one thing about all borders is that they always are in a constant state of change. They're never constant. And finally, the big question is how can theories of border cultures and object theories, such as theories of perception and entanglement theories, be used to explain the social dimension of coinage and its role in constructing personal, ethnic, regional and national identities in the medieval Anglo-Scottish borderlands? And these three questions I'll attempt to address tonight using the 12th century coinage. So this is the next few slides will be an introduction to the thesis. This little map shows the area of my study area. So the highlighted areas include Cumbria, County Durham, Northumberland, and Tyne and Wear in northern England. And for southern Scotland, it is Dumfries and Galloway and the Scottish borders. So what do we know already about coinage in the Anglo-Scottish borders and the Anglo-Scottish borders in general? Well, we have documentary evidence for cross-border contacts. We've got quite a lot of documentary evidence for this, and this could be cross-border landholding, monastic institutions owning cross-border property, people in market sites, trading, custom accounts as well. We can also use. We've got extensive documentary evidence of of cross-border contacts. We also know relatively well the composition of the types of coins in circulation nationally in both England and Scotland, thanks to the continuing numismatic research. We also know documentary evidence for the treatment of Scottish coins in England, particularly after the weight reductions in 1367, when Scottish coins were reduced in value and eventually prohibited. And we also know the major political and monetary events as well that happened throughout the medieval period that directly can relate to the Anglo-Scottish borders and can have direct consequences for the borderers on both sides of the border. But what don't we know? We don't know about coinage in the Anglo-Scottish borders is that the relationship between coins and their original landscapes and social contexts in which they were used. This will allow us to facilitate the examination of inter and intra-regional distinctions according to settlement type, political and economic centres, and communication routes. Placing the coins into their original social context is also important in understanding the use, loss, and deposition of these coins, especially how national policies and the movement of armies and people across the border affected the deposition and the types of coins lost.
Paul, forgive me for interrupting. Please forgive me. There seems to be a technical issue with viewing the slides on screen. It's good now, but it wasn't a moment ago.
Okay, which slide? I could go back if need be.
No, I think that's fine now. I'll if we encounter it again, I hope we won't, but it's fine now. Let's hope it's okay in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. So we also don't fully understand the relationship between the Scottish and English currencies and how these two coinages interacted with each other within a border context, and how national monetary policies in both England and Scotland, specifically after 1367, influenced the connections of trade and exchange. And because coinage was the principal medium of exchange, it can show how border societies interacted with one another through time. We don't know the extent of the role, the origin of a coin, or the extent or role of national and regional identities had on the circulation. For example, were coins refused simply because they were Scottish or English? And was the declining number of English coins found in Scotland and Scottish coins in England in the late 14th, 15th and 16th centuries not just solely a result of economic factors and physical changes in the coins themselves, but could they also be attributed to cultural factors or factors of identity, as these coins being viewed as coins of the enemy? And we do have a very good example of this, which I'll talk about more detail later in the presentation, from the 12th century, which is Reginald of Durham, stating that during the English-Scottish War of 1173-74, a tavern mistress near Carlisle refused to accept a Scottish coin from a fief because it was the currency of the enemy. So what previous work has actually been carried out on the Anglo-Scottish borders? Most of the work on the medieval Anglo-Scottish borders has actually been undertaken by historians who have looked at the nature of the border and charted its development from an informal border based on tradition to one that became fixed following the Treaty of York in 1237, and then eventually changing through time to becoming what's known as a hard border, a border that didn't really allow free movement across it in the later medieval period because of hostilities and various government attempts by both governments, Scottish and English, to stop and ban cross-border connection and cross-border trade.
Oh, forgive me for intruding again. We seem to have the same problem. Do you need to click through to the next, or something? It seems there's a caption that says Carlisle. Oh, sorry, it's gone back now to the previous one. That's it, Carlisle Castle. We had the caption Carlisle Castle, but not the rest of the text. But it's there now. Okay.
All right. Okay.
Sorry, forgive me. It's all good now. It's maybe you need to click through, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. That's brilliant. Thank you for letting me know. So most of the work, of course, again on the attitudes and the societies of the borders have also been carried out mostly by historians. So very little cross-border archaeological work on the material culture, on objects crossing boundaries, has actually been undertaken for the Anglo-Scottish border. And this can further advance our understanding of cross-border connections. And most national numismatic studies carried out in England and Scotland, for example, Richard Kelleher's PhD, 2012 PhD, which looked at the national picture in England, and of course Nicholas Holmes' study of 2004, which looked at the national picture in Scotland, have tended to focus on national patterns rather than looking at the specific patterns and what's going on in the Anglo-Scottish borders. And of course, these national studies didn't also look at the political and theoretical aspects such as culture and border attitudes within the Anglo-Scottish borders. So my methodology that I have used, I have continued the use of the period system, dividing the coins, the single coin finds, both English and Scottish, into 9 different periods, starting in 1135, going all the way through to 1603 to the Union of the Crowns under James VI and James I. So the 2 periods we'll be focused on tonight are periods 1 and periods 2. So period 1 is focusing on the English coinage of Stephen and the baronial coinage, and of course the Scottish coinage of David I, Earl Henry, Malcolm IV, and the first coinage of William I. While period 2 looks at the English cross-crosslet coinage of Henry II, and of course the crescent coinage of William the Lion. So in total, for my entire single find data set from 1135 to 1603, I have recorded over 2,500 single coin finds from the Anglo-Scottish borders, of which 1,667 are English issues and 904 are Scottish. So for each coin, I have recorded the ruler, the class, denomination, mint, find spot, and if possible, the grid reference. Now, the grid reference is important as it allows these coins to be digitally mapped using GIS, and we can map these alongside landscape features such as topography and other features such as ecclesiastical sites, market centres, and importantly, known communication routes such as the old Roman road network. Yeah, so as I mentioned, the periods we're interested in are periods 1 and 2, which covers the majority of the 12th century. Because these are periods, why we divide these coins into periods is that it allows statistical analysis, and we can observe changes to both the English and the Scottish coinages over time. And I will say a very, very brief note on the Scottish periods. The 15th and 16th century Scottish coinage is extremely complex in comparison with the English coinage. In the Scottish coinage, we're seeing a lot of different denominations that are issued and then are withdrawn. That would result in the creation of many more periods, some of which would be too short to be statistically viable. So that was a little bit of a problem to start with in the thesis, was to actually develop an effective period system for the Scottish coinage that would be useful in comparing it with the English coinage. And of course, with the methodology and with data sets like this also come biases. And perhaps probably the biggest bias is the different recording systems that are in and methodologies that are in existence on both sides of the border. Whereas in England, we have the portable antiquity scheme. In Scotland, we have the treasure trove system, and both of which are slightly different recording systems with different laws. And more importantly, the information recorded by these institutions is also different. Whereas the portable antiquity scheme lists all the objects individually. In Scotland, that is not normally the case on the treasure trove database system. Sometimes coins are recorded, groups of coins are recorded under one entry and are often mixed with several other non-numismatic finds. So it does take a lot of digging out as well with the Scottish data. So it did take quite a long time to actually to dig out the Scottish data. And then, of course, another problem with the Scottish data is how grid references are recorded. There's no Scottish effective Scottish grid reference for single coin finds that have been recorded prior to 2010. Find spots have been listed, but these to extrapolate the grid references from these pre-2010 coins, we've had to center them on a village or on a site, and also with the post 2010 Scottish data, sometimes because the coins are recorded, a lot of coins are recorded under one entry, they're all listed with one grid reference rather than each individual grid reference. So these were the sorts of biases that have been introduced, and I've had to work through during the course of this PhD. So having discussed a little bit about the methodology, I can now move on to actually discuss a little bit about the idea and what this 12th century border was. Basically, the border, it was, before the Treaty of York, it was a border based on tradition set between the Solway Firth in the west and the River Tweed in the east. And this only really came about, this line only really came about after 1092, when William Rufus expelled the local Dolphin from Carlisle, who was a client ruler of King Malcolm III of Scotland. And by building a fort at Carlisle, he sort of anchored that the western border at Carlisle. And of course, this border was further consolidated under Henry I, when he consolidated more his grip over northern England. And of course, in southern Scotland, the idea of the core of the Kingdom of Scotland was always traditionally seen as the lands north of the River Forth, the Firth of Forth, between the Firth and the Tay. And southern Scotland, or the southeast Scotland, the Lothians, only really came securely into Scottish possession with the victory of Malcolm II at the Battle of Carham in 1017. And so the people of southern Scotland broadly accepted the King of Scots overlordship, but it was basically this idea of this 12th century border was that the English crown nor the Scottish crown were powerful enough to really advance their holdings beyond this line, and their power and authority beyond this line. Now, of course, this changed in 1136 after the death of Henry I, when, of course, David I of Scotland seized control of the city of Carlisle, and over the course of the late 1130s and 1140s, gradually gained control over large parts of northern England. And the map that I've on this slide shows the rough extent of David and his son Earl Henry's effective sphere of control in the Anglo-Scottish borders. But it's also important to point out as well that Galloway at this time was an autonomous province. It was a separate province, as was large parts of Western Scotland, and of course larger parts of northern Scotland. So areas around the Moray Firth and Caithness were only very sort of kind of loosely bound to Scottish under the King of Scots nominal control. And so this 12th century border was basically a jurisdiction between two different states, between the English state and between this emerging Scottish state. Of course, I do not have the time to go into a lot more detail about the nature of Scottish state building in the 12th century in this talk, but it really is a fascinating subject. And this border, this Solway Tweed line, what can be described in the 12th century also as an open border. That is, that it allowed the free movement of people and goods across it without any government interference, as we see after the Scottish Wars of Independence. So now I shall move on to some data analysis. This first distribution map is showing the distribution of the period 1 coins. So our English coins are the blue dots. So these are the coins of King Stephen and any baronial issues. Of course, because as we can see from the distribution map, the coins of Stephen, the English coins, are broadly concentrated in the eastern parts of the English borders, with only 2 examples recorded from the west. So in total, from my Anglo-Scottish borders dataset, there are 8 English coins currently recorded. 7 from Northern England and only 1 from southwest Scotland, from a site called Cruggleton in Dumfries and Galloway, which was an important centre for the Lords of Galloway. And the red dots are the Scottish coins of David I, Earl Henry, Malcolm IV, and the first coinage of William I. And as we can see, these are found pretty much all over the Anglo-Scottish borders. So in total, there are 33 Scottish coins of dating from 1136 to 1170 found in the Anglo-Scottish borders. 23 of those have been found in the English border regions, and 10 have been found in Scotland. But it is possible. So what we're seeing already is that Scottish coins in Northern England are outnumbering the English coins. And we can actually take this analysis further by breaking down the Scottish coins per ruler. So this distribution map shows the distribution of the coins of David I, which are the red dots, the coins of Earl Henry, which are the blue dots, and the coins of the first coinage of William I, which are the green dots. And it's also worth pointing out that some coins are not recorded on this distribution map because they've got no detailed area of their find spot. For example, a coin of David I found in the South Lakeland area would cover such a broad area of southern Cumbria, and so hasn't been included on the map. And it's also worth pointing out that there are coins of the first coinage of William I found in the English border regions as well. So what this map is actually showing is that the coins of David I, the red coins, are found across the Anglo-Scottish borders, while those of Earl Henry, the blue dots, are largely concentrated in the English border regions and are largely absent from southern Scotland. And this can be further emphasized if we look at the national distributions of the coins of David I, which is what this map, these 2 maps show. As we can see from these maps, the coinage of David I is found pretty much broadly across England and across Scotland. And if we look in contrast to those of Earl Henry, we can now see a bit of a difference here. Mostly that the coins of Earl Henry are concentrated in Northern England, with smaller concentrations in Lincolnshire and southeast England as well. But it will be noticed from the map, the national map, that coinage of Earl Henry is largely absent from Scotland. So why might that be? And I have put forward potentially several theories, which I will now discuss. So a little bit of historical context. In the the late 1130s and 1140s and early 1150s, there was civil war in England between King Stephen and the Empress Matilda, who was Henry I's daughter. And as a result, it resulted in a breakdown of royal control, not only over the country, but also over the coinage as well, which meant that various barons or anybody who was powerful enough began minting their own coinage. And previous studies have suggested and shown that these coinages developed their own circulation patterns and only circulated in their issuers' sphere of influence and principal landholdings. And so if we bring this to the borders, I mean, what's going on with the coinage distribution between David and Earl Henry in the borders? It has been proposed that a joint kingship existed between David and Henry in northern England, and the location of the coins of both men found in their English territories further supports this. However, this joint kingship does not explain the virtual absence of Henry's coins from Scotland. Now, the main factor here may be the relative status of between David and Earl Henry. David, as the King of Scots, was the ultimate secular authority in Scotland proper. Now, Scotland proper is the modern day Scotland, so that's the area, all the area above the Solway-Tweed border, rather than including the areas of northern England under Scottish control. While Henry, his son, was only an earl, the Earl of Huntingdon, and then latterly the Earl of Northumberland. And despite Earl Henry being what's known as the Rex Designatus in Scotland, so heir to the Scottish throne. The lack of coins from Henry might suggest that there may be some coinage control going on, similar to that has been proposed for the regional baronial coinage in England with their limited circulation patterns, in that only coins of David were permitted to circulate in Scotland. Now, this was because this was the time when David himself was expanding his dominance over mainland Scotland and developing the royal household and administration. And as such, it would have been desirable to implement stronger royal control over the currency produced and in circulation in Scotland in order to provide and maintain a coinage of good weight and fineness. While Scottish kings of the 12th century after David had control over the coins they issued from their own mints, they did not have control over the currency in circulation in Scotland. And as we will see in the later part of the 12th century, the number of English coins in Scotland actually grew. And of course, before eventually English coins become the dominant coinage in Scotland in the 13th and 14th centuries. Of course, other factors could help explain this distribution. It could also be the principal landholding patterns of David and Henry. Of course, Earl Henry's principal landholdings were concentrated in northern England, principally in the northeast of England, as well as supposedly, theoretically, holding Cumbria and Carlisle jointly with King David, though in reality, it was actually King David who exercised control over Carlisle and Cumbria, as he saw that as an essential part to his own dominions. And so we know that Earl Henry has, from charter evidence, that Earl Henry had properties in Scotland as well, but his principal sphere of influence was the northeast and northern England, which might help explain some of these differences in coin circulating patterns between David and Henry. And of course, the presence of a small number of coins of Stephen, which is worth noting that all the coins recorded of Stephen from the Anglo-Scottish borders, and indeed Scotland in general, all belong to his Type 1, his first issue, which was produced across England before the breakdown of royal control. So these, as we saw in the distribution maps, these coins of Stephen are particularly concentrated in the northeast England. And this may relate to the known documentary evidence for the gradual control that David and Henry formed over northern England. So, for example, Carlisle and northern Cumbria had been under Scottish control since 1136, while the consolidation of Scottish control of the northeast took longer due to a greater degree of hostility towards David from the Northumbrian elite and, of course, the military activities of Stephen himself. Formal possession of Northumberland was eventually won in 1139 with the Second Treaty of Durham and the granting of the earldom of Northumbria to Earl Henry. And of course, these English coins of Stephen were probably in circulation in the English borders during the period of 1136 and the Battle of Lincoln in 1141. And it's between those dates, it has been proposed that that is when David and Henry were issuing coins in Stephen's name from the Carlisle Mint. And of course, as they consolidated, the breakdown of, as the ongoing Civil War resulted in further breakdown of royal control, and of course, the minting of many local issues across England in the early to mid 1140s. And of course, the further consolidation of Scottish control in northern England resulted in the disappearance of these English coins from the area, as the supply of these coins to the region was reduced and converted into regional issues issued by the local mints, which is probably why not many coins of Stephen at this period are actually making it up into Scotland. So those are just some a very sort of brief run through of some of the theories about why these differences in coins between David and Earl Henry, the differences in circulation and distribution, might be occurring. So before we start going into delve into these further, we can look at now the distributions and the patterns of the later 12th century coinage. So that's the coinage of the English coinage of Henry II, the crosslet coinage, and the crescent coinage of William I of Scotland. And of course, as we can see here from this distribution map, we can see that the English coins, so the crosslet coins, are found on both sides of the Anglo-Scottish borders. So in total, in my data set, I have 22 crosslet coins recorded from the Anglo-Scottish borders. 15 of those come from England, and 7 of those come from the Scottish borders. Now, in contrast, we can already see a difference here in the distribution with the Scottish coins and the English coins. The crescent coinage, the red dots of William, are only found in southern Scotland, in the Scottish border regions, rather than the English border regions, which is in stark contrast to what we saw earlier with the coins of David and Earl Henry, which were found across northern England. And indeed, if we look at the national patterns, the crescent coinage is absent as both single finds and from hoards across England, though there was one fragmentary crescent coin found from the site of Clanfars in Anglesey. But other than that, these crescent coins of William are absent from England. And likewise, the presence of the English Telby coinage, the crosslet coinage of Henry II, are more largely concentrated in southern Scotland, and as far as you get further north, you get less and less finds. Though there is a hoard from Elgin that was deposited in roughly the 1170s, 1180s, that did contain, or supposedly contained, crosslet coins of Henry II, which did show that these English coins were beginning to penetrate deeper into Scotland in the latter 12th century. So now we move on to actually discussing why these differences in the English and Scottish coinages occur. So Henry II regained control of northern England in 1157, and so the border was then re-established at the Solway-Tweed line, as it had been in the reign of Henry I. And also with this new found authority in England, Henry II also initiated a recoinage and a new national currency, the cross-crosslet coinage, in 1158, which largely removed all these baronial and local issues from circulation. Though it is always worthy of note to point out that coins of David and Earl Henry were still in circulation in northern England in the 1170s, as is evident from the Outchester hoard that was from Northumberland, that was buried in, deposited roughly probably in about the early 1170s as well. So Scottish coins of David and Henry were still circulating or still in use in northern England during the Tailby coinage. And of course, the coinage, the crescent coinage of William, was introduced in roughly the early 1170s. And it has been suggested that through analysis by Tim Crafter, that there is actually a physical difference between the Scottish crescent coinage and the cross-crosslet coinage of Henry II, in that the Scottish coinage was actually heavier than the English coinage, whereas the coins of David and Earl Henry were struck to the same weight and fineness as the official issues of King Stephen. And why this sudden change? Why the crescent coinage were actually made heavier than the English coinage is unknown. It could be that it was deliberately done because factors such as weight can send clear messages about differentiating coins of different states or rulers. And of course, we don't know the reasoning behind this change of weight. It could have been motivated by a desire to further distinguish Scottish coins from the English. And as well, because the fineness and weight of a coinage can be a good indicator of the relative economic strength and the raw material available to a ruler or state for producing a coinage. And of course, as I've just mentioned, the absence of these coins from England shows they were generally not accepted there. But as well, we can also see as well potentially some political factors being motivated here for the presence of the English coins, the cross-crosslet coins in southeast Scotland, because the war of 1173-74, when William joined the rebellion against Henry II and got defeated at Alnwick, which led him to being forced to sign the Treaty of Falaise, which effectively gave Henry II control of important Scottish strongholds such as Roxburgh and Jedburgh in the Scottish borders. And of course, these towns were actually garrisoned by English troops. Now, there were also other towns such as Edinburgh and Stirling that were included in the Treaty of Falaise, and Edinburgh itself was garrisoned by English troops. But Henry seems to have been quite lax in applying his rights over William with the treaty itself, and only a certain number of these Scottish strongholds were actually garrisoned by English troops. And it may be because we do have find spot evidence for English coins from excavations at Jedburgh. So we have two finds from Jedburgh, and we have two further finds from very close vicinity of Roxburgh. But of course, we can't just relate all the presence of these English coins in this area solely due to to military and political factors, economic and social factors also need to be considered. An important fact is that the southeast Scotland was one of the most intensely exploited and economically profitable regions in the country, in Scotland. Two of Scotland's major boroughs and commercial centres, so that's Roxburgh and Berwick, lay in the area, as well as several major religious institutions such as Melrose Abbey, Kelso Abbey, Jedburgh and Dryburgh. And these monastic institutions had been increasingly exploiting and developing the land, and from the reign of David I. And it's also interesting to note that this area, this Tweed Valley area, also had some of the earliest cash rent payments in Scotland, and this demonstrates an early use of cash in transactions of any kind in Scotland. So this basically means that people in southeast Scotland were probably more familiar and used to handling and using money in transactions compared to other parts of Scotland. And this has an important implication for cross-border connections and cross-border trade, as it seems if this is the case, it could be that cross-border trade in the later 12th century was increasingly using monetary coins in their trade and exchange rather than solely relying on barter. And this is despite this physical difference between the English and Scottish coins. Now, finally, there is some other factors that we can actually consider for the 12th century, and we can actually maybe look at further that can help explain this these cross-border uses of different coin, and that's the cultural role of coins. The role of coinage was its use primarily as a means of exchange, but the design and message displayed on the coin also served an important purpose. It served to convey political messages and the culture and identity of the issuer to a larger audience to be understood by the literate and the illiterate. Coins were official objects issued by rulers, and the physical appearance of coins, such as the overall design, the portrait, the legends, weight, fineness, size and shape that each ruler or state issued, was carefully selected in order to convey that ruler or state's identity. In using his own name on his coins, King David I was clearly projecting the power and legitimacy of his kingship to a wide audience, especially as coins were associated and connected with power. These messages can be linked to the wider concept of consolidated control and fostering loyalties with the elite and the lower population in those areas of northern England under Scottish control. With David and Earl Henry issuing coins in their own name, and the gradual elimination of the English issues of Stephen from the English borders, there could be no doubt in the minds of the English border population as to where the true power actually lay. Of course, the messages that coins can also carry could also serve as a boundary marker or to mark out specific territory. This could be especially relevant in the case of the distribution of David and Earl Henry coins. As we've already seen, coins of Earl Henry are particularly concentrated in the English borders, while those of David are found right across the Anglo-Scottish borders and Scotland in general. The legends on coin issued by Earl Henry identifies Henry as an earl. These coins were issued in Henry's territories in northeast England, so from mints such as Corbridge, Bamborough, and of course from his mint as well in Carlisle, from where David was also issuing coins. And it can be suggested that the message conveyed on Henry's coins was symbolising his legitimacy as the Earl of Northumbria, as well as signifying that he was the ultimate lord of his lands and not King Stephen. This type of message can be described as what's known as embellic, which means that the coin is transmitting a clearly defined message to a population or group regarding identity and affiliation. The legend, of course, the legends on David's coins identifies David as a king. And of course, the slight difference in design between the coins of David and Earl Henry and the difference in legends projects the different status of David and Henry. It shows that David is a king and Henry is an earl, while highlighting the lands and territories, an area that they controlled. It could be argued that these messages on these Scottish coins, particularly those of Earl Henry, did serve a function in marking out territorial boundaries, in that Henry's coins primarily circulated within his main landholding territories and power bases. Of course, now, coins in the Anglo-Scottish borders were not solely refused due to differences in weight or composition, as we saw with the crescent coins of William I, because during the War of 1173-74, who, according to Reginald of Durham, a tavern mistress in northern Cumbria, refused to accept a Scottish coin from a thief who stole a bag of coins from the Church of St. Cuthbert at Plumpton due to it being of the enemy. Now, this is quite important because this is the only documented instance of a Scottish coin being refused on patriotic grounds during a war. So we have no evidence during the Scottish Wars of Independence that a coin was refused solely because it was a coin of the enemy. And it is impossible to ascertain the type of Scottish coin that was refused because we already, as we've seen, the coinage of David and the first issues of William I and Earl Henry are present in the English borders. And of course, the physical evidence also is backed up with the documentary evidence that Scottish coins were in use in Northern England, which is further emphasised by a statement in the Dialogus de Sacro of 1177-79 that states that any type of coin could be used to pay the farms of Cumberland and Northumberland. So this refusal of a Scottish coin wasn't the monetary aspect of the coin being refused, but the fact that this coin represented the enemy through its design, which provoked a negative emotional response. And of course, it has been suggested that during periods of political instability, such as a war, a greater emphasis was placed on the cultural identity of an object, as well as a person or collective group. So by refusing this coin, the tavern mistress was projecting her own loyalties to England during a time of war, and it can be argued that this was a personal choice, an important part of her identity related to a specific event. Now, and that's quite important because we know from the studies of border societies that border identities were increasingly becoming more attached to their respective countries. So people in the Northern English borders were more readily defining themselves as English, loyal subjects of the English crown, where in southern Scotland, quite simply put, they were adapting and accepting the overlordship and the rule of the King of Scots. And so that by the reign of Alexander III, people in southern Scotland were not simply identifying themselves as either English or Anglo-Saxon, they were identifying themselves as Scottish, subjects of the Scottish king. And this was a process that was beginning in the 12th century. So that's an important point about the increasing sort of loyalty to one state in these border communities in the Anglo-Scottish borders. But also another interesting fact is that in Scotland itself, nationally, Scottish coins outnumbered the English issues during the 12th century. And this could indicate that a small native Scottish coinage and a growing monetary economy played a part, okay, maybe a small part, in fostering and reinforcing the idea of Scotland and the idea of Scottishness. This idea of Scotland, it was not as we know it today, or in the high medieval period. This was a Scotland that was made up of several different cultures and semi-autonomous provinces and lords in the 12th century. And in the 12th century, the process was beginning where all these were joining together to form the nation of Scotland. And how these coinage could help play a role in fostering this idea of Scottishness is that people were using the same currency as much as they shared the same king and laws. So coins are one way in which a sense of commonality between communities can be developed. The use of coins with the same iconography can encourage collective values by being seen, exchanged, and integrated into daily community habits. This then further emphasizes the importance of coin design and the specific messages a ruler or state was trying to project to a wider audience. The Scottish kings of the 12th century ensured that their design of their coins, and in the case of the crescent issue, was a different weight compared to the English issues. The Scottish coins named the King of Scots, an important showcase showing an independent Scottish monarchy. The 12th century kings of Scots resisted interference from the English crown and the English church that would undermine their authority and prestige. Now, a small native coinage could be used by Scottish kings for patronage and gift giving and to expend their power over petty lords and rulers whose territories were on the fringes of Scottish royal control. The development of coinage in Scotland not only stimulated the economy, but also integrated Scotland into a wider European trade network, thus forming closer bonds and commercial interests and bringing Scotland into the fold with other coin-producing nations. This flow of cash also allowed the king to maintain his close circle of followers, develop the institutions of medieval government, as well as develop new dependents that were dependent on him for cash that he could pay, such as mercenaries and knights. But also, it would allow the Scottish kings to physically show the physical representation, such as churches and castles, which showcasing the power of the Scottish royal line. And it can also be presumed that the King of Scots would prefer to use their own coin in gift giving rather than any foreign coin. And this is the same sort of principle in the same way that the gold unicorns of James IV were used 3 centuries later, were used as primarily as gifts to foreign dignitaries, where internal payments under James IV pretty much used foreign gold such as French crowns. So this shared experience in the Anglo-Scottish borders of using English and Scottish coins contributed to their cross-border use. Yes, Scottish coins carried the name of the King of Scots, but it was this familiarity of using an economically trusted coinage in the case of David I, Earl Henry, Malcolm IV, and the first coinages of William I, which were struck to the same high standards of King Stephen, and because this was, and it probably that was probably the reason why after the reversion of control of Northern England back to English control, that coins of David and Earl Henry were still obviously being used in Northern England during the production of the cross-crosslet coinage. And of course, the settled political state in England after 1153 and the introduction of a new national currency in England, so the cross-crosslet coinage in 1158, meant that more English coins made it to Scotland, which in turn would have led to greater use and increased familiarity in Scotland of using English coins, and more so in southern Scotland. So this joint use of English and Scottish coins in the 12th century is actually unique to the Anglo-Scottish borders, as national patterns from England and Scotland show that neither currency made a major impact further north or south. The reason for this is that people further south in England were not accustomed to using Scottish coins, while those further north in Scotland were not exposed to English coins as frequently as those in southern Scotland. It can be suggested that this was a difference in perception and experience of using both currencies depending on an individual's location. Of course, the supply of both Scottish and English coins no doubt played a role in the extent of their use, but it's these perceptions about English and Scottish coins in the borders were as a result of the unique cross-border entangled networks that were in operation between these two communities, these two societies, in which these coins were handled and exchanged in. So, for example, in the 12th century, Carlisle and Cumberland's most important connections and market was southern Scotland, rather than areas further south. And of course, cross-border attitudes and relations in the 12th century were largely friendly. And this 12th century also saw the increase and the start of cross-border landholding, which would become so numerous in the 13th and 14th centuries. And again, it was through this shared experience of recognizing what was English and Scottish, and the difference, and of course these differences in design. And of course, we've only got the one example of rejection based on cultural grounds for either coins comes from the Tavern Mysteries, but there appears to be no evidence or no suggestion or grounds to suggest that there is a whole widespread evidence of rejection of coins based on cultural grounds. And of course, it's the perceptions, of course, people's perceptions of these two currencies would change over time based on either personal choices. So, for example, again, the Tavern Mysteries, or physical changes to the coinage, such as those relating to the Scottish coinage after 1367, with changes in weights and finenesses. So and to finally conclude, as we've already seen, the 12th century saw unique patterns of coin loss in the Anglo-Scottish borders brought about by political and cultural perceptions, as well as supply of currency. It can also be suggested as well that this Solway-Tweed line, the Anglo-Scottish border, acted as a sort of currency board to certain coins. So the coins of Earl Henry and the crescent coins of William I, which is interesting in itself, though, because it suggests that despite Scottish control over northern England under David and Earl Henry, and despite later Scottish claims to the northern counties, this line, this border, was always seen as the division between Scotland proper and England. The numismatic evidence does seem to support this, and which could add to the idea of nature of this border not only being a jurisdictional border, but also at this time a limited currency border, before we see the large influxes of English coins into Scotland and the increasing spread of Scottish coins into England in the 13th and 14th centuries. The evidence, of course, also suggests, with the presence of both English and Scottish coins across the Anglo-Scottish borders, that there was a cross-border exchange of coins, and these coins carried cultural messages. Of course, this shared experience of using both currencies probably contributed to the development of tighter cross-border connections, as it allowed more sophisticated levels of trade and exchange to take place. Further work includes applying these theories of cultural perception and entanglement theories and identity to the later medieval coinages in the Anglo-Scottish borders, so the 13th and 14th and 15th and 16th century coins. So whether we see these, whether we can argue that some of these patterns can be attributed, and the cultural role of a Scottish coinage after the reformed Scotland under King Robert I, and the resettlement of Scotland after the wars and during the wars of independence, but also the role that this native Scottish coinage played in the propaganda of the extensive propaganda of the Bruce regime. So these are all topics for further work, and of course I would like to add a note that some of the theories and points that I've raised tonight for the 12th century may change, maybe slightly different in the actual final thesis when that gets submitted. So that concludes my talk tonight, and I would like to just finish, if I may, with a few acknowledgements. So I suppose my first acknowledgement tonight goes to you, the British Numismatic Society, whose own research and publications over the past 15 years have helped inspire my own way of thinking and developing my own numismatic thinking to begin to apply to this PhD. So thank you very much for your continued excellent research in all aspects of British and non-British coinage in the British Isles. Of course, further acknowledgements has to go to the staff of the Portable Antiquities Scheme and the staff of the Treasure Trove Unit in Scotland for their willingness and prompt responses in replying to my requests for data. Also to Dr. Barry Cook of the British Museum, who has always freely gave data on unpublished hoards. Of course, a special thanks must also go to Dr. Murray Andrews, who not only provided me with some of his work prior to publication, but also assisted and gave time to help me develop the statistical analysis parts of this PhD. So thank you very much to Murray for his time and effort in that. And of course, the final acknowledgements go to my 4 supervisors, Dr. Steve Ashby, Dr. Alex McLean at the University of York, and Doctors Alex Blackwell and Anna Groundwater at National Museums of Scotland. And the final acknowledgement tonight goes to, in many ways, a person who is was and still is my sort of numismatic mentor, and the person who really helped me develop over the last decade an appreciation for numismatics in Scotland and Scottish numismatics. And the final acknowledgement tonight goes to Nicholas Holmes, Research Associate at National Museums of Scotland, for his unwavering support before and during this thesis. So thank you very much to Nick, and thank you very much for listening tonight. So thank you very much.